Huh?
Very good crowd.
Which one?
The guy with the glasses in the beard.
Oh, okay. Oh, in the back there. Okay. Yeah, that's the garrison superintendent's here. He's not going to talk. But
Oh,
yeah, he's nobody.
who's the garrison superintendent?
Yeah, the guy in the back there on the right.
Oh,
Yeah, there he is. There he is.
who?
Jason.
Oh.
She's from CV. She's from CV, aren't you?
Did I wait a couple of minutes?
I would just start.
Huh?
600 pounds, tell her now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Fair point.
Man never made more than 30 grand a year.
How you doing? You good?
Going live in a second.
Huh?
It's going live in a second.
Okay.
15 seconds.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
Do we need to check again? Does the sound come through?
I have it here.
Just the right number of chairs.
Perfect.
Well, good evening, and welcome to St. Mary's in the Highlands for this evening's conversation on revaluation. It's always great to be in an Episcopal church here in the Diocese of New York. My great-grandfather, the Reverend Epiphanius Wilson, was called by the diocese to preach here in 1890 at St. Mark's in Mount Kisco. Moved the Wilson family here, and we've been here ever since. I live over the hill in Mahopac. I've been here since 1998 in Putnam County. And to thank St. Mary's for their hospitality in the parish hall. And it's great to be back here in the parish hall. It was 8 years ago that I gave a talk here. It was called Connecting the Dots. And it was a story about, I don't know if you remember this, the Roger Ailes was going to put his name on the side of the senior center. If you remember that. And Mary Ellen Odell was the county executive. And then there was the other part about Libby Pataki with her troubled tourism agency, the county agency that I'd written about, and kind of tied it all together. We had a good evening. That was 8 years ago. And thanks to the panelists here who've come to talk about property assessments and revaluation, the possibility of it in Phillipstown. We have John Wallum, who's the regional representative for the Office of Real Property Services, State of New York, who goes around to municipalities who are doing revaluations and helps them through the process. We have Vic Mallison, who's the executive director of the Westchester County Tax Commission. He's a former deputy commissioner of the State Department of Tax and Finance. And then we have two Phillipstown residents here who've been in the real estate field. Bill Pugh, still selling real estate, and Kathy Corey, who has just retired.
That's right.
And they have both, they're people who've been advocating for a revaluation here in town for a few years. And for those of you who live here, you know that Phillipstown has kind of flirted with this over the past decade. In 2013, the supervisor said they were going to do a revaluation, and it never got off the ground. And then in 2019, again, they were going to do one in-house, and that never got off the ground. Maybe they did some work, but it didn't really, never happened. A few ground rules here. I know firsthand that some people can get emotional about taxes, property taxes and all. We're hoping to have a very respectful discussion here tonight. We have some experts here. We want to hear from people after we've talked here. We just want to keep it, we'll have time for discussion. I'd invited the town assessor, Brian Kenny, to join in the conversation. He's the part-time assessor in the town of Phillipstown. And as you know, the assessment rolls are used, really what they do is they allocate, they're used to allocate the property taxes. And in Phillipstown, it's about $40 million worth of property taxes that are levied each year in this town. You have Putnam County with their piece of the tax base. You got the town of Phillipstown. If you live in the villages, you have Cold Spring and Nelsonville have taxes that use the assessment roll to allocate. And then, of course, the school districts, Haldane, Garrison, piece of Lakeland. So it's all about the allocation of the tax levy. Now, I'm the Tax Watch columnist at the Journal News, lohud.com. I've been writing this column for the past 11 years, getting into all elements of the property tax system. And in New York, there's a lot of parts of it that I have found to be very unfair. And I've tried to highlight in my writing some of the unfairness in it, and sometimes it can make a difference in local and in state policy. The problem, one of the biggest problems in New York in the property tax system is the fact that unlike 42 other states in the country, New York, in 42 other states, it's a ministerial tax part of the government to assess your property, what it's worth, because you pay your taxes based on the value of your house. In 42 other states, there's a periodic system. It's part of government. It's not a discretionary act, as it is in New York. In New York, it's up to the municipality whether they revalue their property or not. It comes into the political realm. Now, in Phillipstown, the town supervisor has told me and told others that it's too expensive to do it. That to get to the fairness, well, they can't really afford to do that in Phillipstown. So they, what it has done is leave hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate that's not taxed. In Putnam County, on the other hand, we have 6 towns in Putnam County. 4 of them are up to date with their assessment rolls, including the town that I live in Carmel. They're at 100%. The town of Kent, the neighboring town, last week voted to hire an assessment contractor to conduct a revaluation in Kent, leaving Phillipstown as the only town in Putnam County that does not have up-to-date assessment rolls. New York allows municipalities to skip the updates and use what's called the equalization rate, which takes your outdated assessment, which in Phillipstown were last done in 1996, 27 years ago. And this equalization rate is a percentage of your full value, which can fluctuate each year depending on how the real estate market goes. But in community after community, I've seen how the equalization rate fails to capture all the taxable value, especially on the high-end homes, whose values have escalated faster than those on the lower end, or even in the middle. Without a revaluation, people can grieve their assessments if they think it's too high, but the assessor can't raise the outdated assessments if the assessment is too low. Another myth that a misunderstanding, I guess, that some people have is that, oh, when the house gets sold, then the assessment goes to the sales price. Well, that can happen in a community like where I live, in Carmel, where we're at 100%, but it can't happen in a town like Phillipstown. And maybe John can speak to that more, how that works. Your assessment can only go up if you do an improvement on it through a building permit, and they can see how much the value is of your improvement, or through the change in the equalization rate. For example, in the last year in Phillipstown, the equalization rate went down, which increased the values, your assessed value, by about 10% townwide to reflect the inflation. But if you're hugely underassessed, the 10% is not really getting you there. I've covered revaluations throughout the region: Mamaroneck, Ossining, Scarsdale, Carmel, Greenberg. And in each of these municipalities, a similar pattern emerged. High-end homes were undervalued. They weren't paying their fair share of taxes. Now, let's see. So New York has found, New York has this equalization rate system for the communities that don't revalue every year, but it's really not working that well. There's a 2022 report that just came out that found that 343 out of 980 municipal taxing jurisdictions were outside of the equity statistics. They were inequitable. Phillipstown was among them, with inequitable assessments in the town here. And the state has found that Phillipstown has what's called regressive assessments. Regressive assessment is they undervalue the high end and they overvalue the low end. Earlier this year, and this is what got me involved in this, is Bill and Kathy had approached me. They followed my writing over many years. They said, Dave, you really got to take a look at Phillipstown. We've been here, we've seen the transactions here, we see the assessments. Can you come and take a look at what's going on here? Maybe you can write an article. So I did an analysis of 175 sales, all 175 sales from September of 2021 to March of 2023. And they had similar results to the what you might call regressive assessing. The 30 highest priced homes were assessed at 77% of their sales value. The lowest 30 were priced at 108% of their sales value. And by the low end in the Phillipstown market, those are homes that were bought for less than $490,000. The top end were homes valued from 1.2 to 5.7 million. And among the 7 top homes in this sample, 3% of the houses in Phillipstown, 5 of the top 7 had more than $1 million of real estate that wasn't being taxed. 5 out of the 7, $1 million of real estate not taxed. There was a 6,600 square foot house up on Windy Ridge that was purchased for $5.7 million. And it was taxed as if it was worth $3 million. That's $2.7 million worth of real estate that's not being taxed. That they're not part of the pie, part of the tax base. There was a 13-bedroom home on Forest Farm Road in Garrison was purchased for $3.5 million. It's assessed for $2.1 million. $1.4 million in real estate not being taxed. Then there are homes that were purchased years ago, and they've just kind of inched up along the way. And let's just take former Governor Pataki's house. Now, I like George. I go way back with George to early 1990s when I covered the State House in Albany. And he was an assemblyman before he rose up, become governor. And he's got a 30-room, 14-bedroom, 9-bath home on 6 acres overlooking the Hudson in Garrison. Could use a little work, I hear, but it's a beautiful house. I think his daughter Allison's now living there. And it's taxed as if it's worth $2.6 million. Now, Bill here, he's been around for a while. He thinks it could fetch at least $6 million if it went up for sale. So the former governor has $3 million worth of real estate that's not being taxed. And that's, and that's not taxed for Putnam County, Garrison School District, Town of Phillipstown. To put that in some perspective, and as personal disclosure, I'm a Putnam County taxpayer too. I live in a 4-bedroom, modest bungalow in Mayapack on a lake, 100% valuation, $389,000. I pay my county taxes $968 last year. I checked today. George Pataki, he's got 7 of me that he's not paying taxes on. 7 of me he's not paying taxes on. And there's many more of these homes in your town in a similar situation. Mm-hmm. Now, as governor, George was no fan of revaluation, and I think he was, and today is content with the status quo. Back in 1996, the year Phillipstown last did its revaluation, Westchester County had put together a plan. They had Republicans and Democrats together to do a revaluation of Westchester County real estate. They got it through the legislature. Because at that time, Westchester's assessment rules were very outdated. Passed both houses, and then Governor Pataki vetoed that bill after being pressured by the big corporations in Westchester. And 27 years later, 16 of those municipalities whose outdated assessments were bad then are even worse today. In Westchester, you got 12 out of 25 municipalities that haven't done a revaluation in more than 50 years. So you're only 27 in Phillipstown. Westchester is another story. You don't have to answer for that, Vic, but meanwhile, Putnam County is a leader in updating, having fair assessment rules with 5 out of the 6 towns, and Phillipstown being the outlier. John, I wondered if you could just give us a description about how revaluation works and why a municipality would want to do that.
Sure. For starters, I might want to just offer a little bit of information about the framework of the property tax in New York State. As David said, the idea behind property tax is that we will all pay property tax in relation to the value of our property. There are 3 underlying pillars, if you will, of how that works. These are all in real property tax law. There's something called a valuation date. I suspect everyone here at some point has had an appraisal done. And if you remember that, probably the first thing the appraiser asked you is, okay, what's the date at which I need to set value? That's known as the valuation date. So for every assessment roll in New York State, there is a valuation date, which essentially is July 1st of the preceding year. There's also something called taxable status date, which is the date as of which the assessor can measure whatever physically exists and its condition and who owns it. That typically is March 1st. And then finally, there's a law that requires a uniform percentage of value. And that says that, look, a municipality that has the power to assess can assess its property at whatever percentage of value it chooses, so long as it treats every property in the assessing unit at the same percentage. So let me put this together. For the assessment rolls, whatever community you may be from that were filed in 2023, your assessment represents a certain percentage of market value, which should be the same percentage of market value for all the properties on the roll, with that value having been established as of July 1st last year, with anything that physically existed as of March 1st this year, subject to assessment. So if you had a new house that was completed February 1st, technically it should be on the roll. If it's a piece of vacant land and the house isn't built until the following summer, that wouldn't be assessed until the next year. The reason I went through that is that really sets the stage as to the purpose of the assessment roll. And as Dave said earlier, the assessment roll is used to distribute property tax among each individual property owner once the tax levies to be raised for county, town, school, village, special district purposes have been determined. So it stands to reason that unless assessments, which are static, and I can explain that a little bit too, but absent a reassessment, assessed values typically are static unless there is some new construction or demolition, or unless a property owner is successful in challenging their assessed value. Other than that, the assessor's hands are tied. The assessed values cannot be changed. So if the goal is to achieve fairness in the property tax by having assessments reflect market value, a reassessment needs to be undertaken. And as simply as I can say it, a reassessment, the legal term is a systematic analysis of all property that is meant to reset assessments with current market value, again, using those pillars that I talked about before. So for example, Dave cited the town of Kent. The town of Kent is looking to do its reassessment for 2025. The assessments on the town's 2025 roll will represent 100% of value, with value having been or will be established as of July 1st, 2024, and whatever physically exists as of March 1st, 2025, subject to assessment. The process of doing reassessment, we can talk about that. I don't know if you want me to.
Yeah, because now Kent is, now they're doing theirs for $600,000 at about $90 a parcel. They have 6,700 parcels. Phillipstown has 5,100 parcels. So that shakes out to about 470,000 if Phillipstown was to get the same deal that Kent got. So that's and maybe you could talk about how Kent is going to, they're doing some reassessments. The town has somebody go to each house, for example, and attempt, knock on the door to see if people let them in. You don't have to let them in. It's a more expensive way to do it. Now, Kent is doing a lesser cost one where they're using area. Maybe you could just talk about that, the
Sure.
technological improvement.
Sure. As Dave accurately described, there are different ways you can approach conducting a reassessment. In short, a reassessment involves ensuring that the municipality has accurate and complete information about the improvements to all property. So if there's a house, well, what's the square footage? When was it built? What's the style of house? How much land is there? Are there influences to the land? For example, does it have a nice view? Does it have water frontage? A whole host of property characteristics go in to trying to determine what a property's value may be. So without having accurate and up-to-date property characteristics or property information, any attempt at doing a reassessment is going to be at a disadvantage. That's the first very broad phase. The second phase is using systems known as mass appraisal to try to develop values for every property in the town, again, as of the same valuation date. And typically, that effort involves an analysis of sales. There's going to be a certain time period of sales up to the valuation date, so July 1st of whatever year precedes the implementation of the reassessment. And those sales are going to be analyzed to determine, are they arm's length, and are they sales that represent a reasonable indication of market value? Those sales are then going to be used to try to draw some inferences about how similar properties or properties with similar characteristics that had not sold would sell. Again, this is greatly oversimplified, but all of that is used to come up with estimates of value for every property in the town, which are then reviewed by whoever is responsible for the project. That might be the assessor, since Dave has referenced the town of Kent, which has or is in the process of hiring a contractor who will assist. The contractor will be doing that work initially to the assessor's approval. The assessor, of course, ultimately has responsible for all values because the assessor signs the assessment roll. Now, relative to achieving a certain economy of scale or a certain cost effectiveness, Dave referenced the approach that the town of Kent is taking. Traditionally, a reassessment would look to visit every property. People physically visiting each property, walking around, perhaps measuring the dimensions to check them, perhaps even trying to do an interior inspection. Of course, the greater the amount of effort, the more that's going to add to the cost. So, in this day and age, increasingly, places that look to do assessments will look to leverage technology. So in the case of Kent, since there is extensive imagery, what's known as aerial oblique imagery, which are photographs taken from a plane at a certain angle that, with the use of specific software, can be used to check things like dimensions, assuming that the image is clear, and that it can be used to compare images from different years to identify possible changes. So again, a lot of this comes down to an assessing unit's thinking about what's reasonable. In other words, if we want to do a project, what's the most reasonable approach that doesn't break the bank, but still allows us to obtain information to come up with values for all of our properties, which again are subject to review. That's the approach, what I just described, that's the approach that the town of Kent is going to take.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Sure.
And Vic, you're in Westchester. Of course, there's a lot of municipalities that haven't revalued for many, many years, decades, but you also have municipalities that have and are keeping their rolls at 100%. What's been the experience with the revaluations in Westchester? Maybe if you could give a sense of that.
Sure. We have 6 municipalities out of our 25 that I deal with that have done reassessment work, most of them from 2016 forward. 5 out of the 6 are on either a 4 or 5 year cycle that they work with John's office and usually with a contractor. On every 4 or 5 years, they get together with their contractor that they utilize, and they go out and they look at each and every property and they revalue each and every property throughout the jurisdiction. The town of Pelham actually does this on an annualized basis. But they don't actually do a revaluation each and every year. They do what's called a reassessment without the revaluation. They do a lot of what's called trending. They take a look at the sales analysis and they figure out what a square footage of a particular style of house might be in a particular neighborhood, and they trend moving forward and try to keep their equalization rate, if you will, their level of assessment at 100%. And John, by the way, you can step in and tell me I'm wrong at any point in time.
The only thing I would add to what you just said is Pelham actually does the highest level. They actually do a reappraisal every year. So they are developing individual property value estimates each year and reviewing them individually. But the point that Vic brought up that is so important, Pelham first did a reassessment back in 1998 with a vendor, which is pretty typical for a municipality that hasn't done a reassessment in a considerable period of time. Again, to be fair to assessors, it's very, very difficult for any individual assessor, especially since many of them do not have adequate staffing, to try to do a project of this magnitude without vendor support. I would say virtually all assessors have a full-time job just keeping up with new construction, exemptions, everything that's needed to do to publish the assessment roll each year. What's so commendable about the town of Pelham is the town of Pelham, after taking 1 year off in '99, they began a process of valuing the town annually every year from 2000 right up to the current year. They have essentially incorporated the knowledge of how to do this valuation work while also keeping up with changes to inventory in-house, so they can, they can achieve the gold standard of having a current roll every year, but also saving the town money, minimizing the cost by doing it in-house. And, ideally, in a perfect world, that would be great if every municipality could achieve that.
Yeah. The town of Pelham, by the way, is about 2,900 parcels, so it's a little smaller. But like you said, it was about $400,000 when they first did their reassessment, their revaluation back in 1998. So they spent a little over $100 per parcel to do that. But now they're able to do it in-house, and all they have to do is pay the assessor and his staff, in this case of him, and they're able to keep their values at 100% every year. I talked with the assessor staff today about this, and they reminded me that back in 1998, when they had this done, the supervisor at the time said this was the best thing that he had ever done as a supervisor, because it created the equity in the roll for his taxpayers, and it has really cut down on the number of what are called scars or certiorari, the number of grievances that come in from either homeowners or commercial property owners. And that's part of something that we didn't really talk about. One of the really valuable things that Westchester has seen in its revaluation communities is the fact that those grievances have gone down significantly in most of those communities. There is a caveat to that. In the first year that you do a reassessment, if you haven't done one in some time, you're going to see an uptick because people aren't used to seeing that new number on their tax bill or that letter they get from the assessor that says, I used to look at my tax bill and see that my house was valued at $19,000. Now it's valued at $560,000. That's a big shock to people. But what they're not recognizing is there's another number on that tax bill which actually tells you what your actual market value is by utilizing the equalization rate. And those numbers tend to be fairly similar. And when you do a revaluation, I had the great privilege of being John's boss when I was up in Albany, and couldn't have done my job without him. And now I have him there to help me do my job here in Westchester, or down in Westchester. Well, now that we're in a church, I can say I'm quite blessed in both circumstances. One of the things that I can say is not only do you get equity, but you get these reductions in the amount of scars or certiorari over time, and the cost of doing these things over time does tend to decrease. That first upfront cost is a significant cost, especially if you haven't done something in quite a long time. But what we had happen was there was a conglomerate of municipalities that went in about 2016. They all went together, they went with the same vendor, and they were able to get better pricing than they might have had they gone alone. And you know, whenever you have scale, you're going to end up getting better pricing. And some of the conversations that I've had with folks like David and others who are interested in the subject is when you do these revaluations also, there is a part of the state law that says that you can bond for these things. You do not have to swallow the full cost of this up front. You can spread it out over time.
Yeah, absolutely true. A couple of points to add to what Vic said. I want to emphasize that, as Vic noted, reassessment does not make assessment challenges go away, but I agree with him wholeheartedly. The number will decrease, and what's equally as important, because the assessing unit will now have updated inventory information and valuation information, the defense of those challenges becomes much easier. The towns generally have a much higher success rate defending challenges.
Just for an instance, if I can add to that, one of the beautiful things about having the better ability to defend yourself, we have situations in places like Nassau County where they nearly went bankrupt because of their assessing situation. They were bonding up to $200 million just to pay off their scars and certiorari. But the reality is, when you get a reassessment in a great town like the town of Rye, you're better able to defend against those certiorari, and therefore the budget hits that you take on an annualized basis for having to pay those monies back to those big commercial entities, that diminishes over time because frankly, you're better able to win. And it's not the town of Rye that wins, it's the taxpayers of the town of Rye that are winning in that instance.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what Vic said too, Vic is absolutely right about bonding. That is an approach that's been used historically to obtain money to fund a reassessment. The other approach, which has also been used, is there are communities, to give this context, I work within a region that covers the counties of Delaware, Greene, and Dutchess County down through the tip of the island. There are certainly communities in that territory that have said, look, we need to do a reassessment, and they budget money and set aside a certain amount each year for a period of several years to have essentially the starting point for doing a project. And I would just add to that reassessments are big projects. They sometimes, because, Vic talked about the sticker shock that some people might experience when they get a notice resulting from a reassessment after new values not having been developed for many decades. There's an awful lot of public relations that goes into it. There's a lot of forethought up front in terms of how the project should be approached, how it should be undertaken. I want to be very clear. We at the state, we are definitely proponents of reassessment, but I would never advise everybody just rush out and do a reassessment. You want to go through a very thorough process of planning and preparing for it. And that's not to suggest in any way it shouldn't be done. But again, at the end of the day, you want it to be successful, and you want it to be a project that, as Vic cited from the Pelham assessor at the time, I think it was John Carney, that he was immensely proud of.
If I
Great.
could, John, one more thing on that.
Yeah, one more thing, and then we're going to get to Bill. Yeah.
John asked me what the experience was, and I think in 6 of our municipalities that have reassessed in the 21st century, we've had fantastic results. And there was one municipality that did a reassessment and they didn't plan appropriately. And the results really weren't quite as good. There was a lot of pushback in the community. They didn't do as good of a job at going out and explaining to people what they were trying to do. And there was such vehemence amongst the property owners with their elected officials that the elected officials backed off of their support of the reassessment. And it turned out to, it didn't go over well. So what John's saying about planning for it and being prepared not only for the mechanics and mathematics and processes of doing the reassessment itself, you also have to plan for the public relations part. And it's extremely important.
Great. We're now going to turn to Bill Pugh. He's been selling real estate in this community for many years. He's been tracking the sales for 25 years. And he has an analysis that he's done. And Bill, take it away. I got to get out of your way here.
Thank you. This is working. Okay. This thing is a little kludgy. It doesn't show up on this screen, at least I can make it work. Anyway, my question is the property tax fair? So let me go forward. Let's do this. Here we go. So my first thought is I take 1 minute to talk about how property tax and budgets work, because I've seen a lot of stuff in the press which is just wrong. The allocation, the assessment does not change the taxes, right? The municipality has all these services they provide us. I mean, taxes really are a good thing. They pay for the library, they pay for the roads, they pay for the schools. This process goes on and they develop a budget. There's our budget, okay? The question is, how do we allocate the budget? And the state of New York has decided we allocate this budget by the value of our property. There we go, value of the property, okay? So everybody pays based on the value of their property. So if your property is worth $1, you pay a certain amount. If you're worth $10, you pay 10 times more. So I wanted to ask the question, are Phillipstown assessments fair? If the assessment says your house is $1, is it? And if it's someone else's is $2, is their house $2? So how did I do this? I took the tax roll, okay? And the tax roll is available online. And this is the state of New York, Putnam County, Phillipstown tax roll for last year. On that you have your assessed value, and then you have this equalization factor. I consider it inflation, okay? And if you look carefully, you'll see you also have a market value. I just did my taxes and I noticed it's actually a market value. Right? The ratio between your assessed value and your market value right now is about 2.5 times. So if your house is $1, your assessment's going to be around 40 cents. How do we measure fairness? This is the way I chose to do it. As David said, I have 25 years worth of sales data, and I have it for single-family homes, for condos, for land, for commercial buildings. And I went through it, and I compared the ones that had sold. And then we only do about 150 to 200 transactions a year. So I took the last 25 years, inflated it for inflation. So all the numbers here are as if it sold this year. And in the last 25 years, we've had about 2,600. There are 2,600 properties that I've been able to track that have sold. So how do we measure fairness? Did they sell for more or less what they were taxed for? And I created a factor. If the full market value is exactly what it sold for, it's fair. If the full market value is more than it sold for, you're overtaxed. If the full market value is less than it sold for, you're undertaxed. So 100% perfect, 110 you paid a little too much, 90% you paid a little too little. Sorry about this. Interestingly, in going through 2,600 sales, I found exactly one which sold for exactly its fair market value. It was a private sale. It happened about 5 or 6 years ago. My guess is they looked at their tax roll. They said, this is what we'll sell it for. Everything else sells above or below. What else? Oh, I made up a number. I said if it sells within 10% of its value, it's fair. Assessing is hard. It's doing an estimate. And estimating is hard. Right? So I just said if it's within 10% of it's fair. So, close to 100%, good. 90 to 100, great. And we're fair. So I went through and I looked at homes and I said, overall, in Phillipstown, we're at 103%. Overall. I'd say that's fair. I've heard that we have discrepancies between school districts, towns, zip codes, in the village, not in the village. I took all those numbers and I played with them. I couldn't find any discrepancies between the zip codes, between in the village, out of the village, in the Haldane school system in Garrison. Little things, but nothing that you would say is dramatic. I did find one thing that was dramatic. And that was what it sold for. So these are all the houses in the last 25 years that have sold for under $1 million as though they had sold this year. So I inflated them up for inflation, then compared them to their assessed value. They're taxed at their fairness factor is 109. So they're at the high end of being taxed fairly. Okay? But they're pretty close. If everybody was like this, you'd say it was fair. What these gentlemen would say, I believe, is if everybody's 109, they'd say, you know what? It's fair. Here's what I found. That's under $1 million. 109, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and over $6 million. Houses over $6 million are being taxed at about 38 cents on the dollar. There's tremendous variation around this. I know a couple of people that have houses that are in the $4 to $5 million range that are actually taxed for more than the $4 to $5 million they'd probably sell for. But there are also a lot of houses that aren't. But the range around here is huge. There are houses that are wildly undertaxed that sell for less than $1 million. And there are houses up here that are taxed for more. But overall, this is what we have. I would argue this is not fair. At the end of the day, it's not fair.
Good.
You have a question? I keep going? I'm not done yet.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I'm trying to remember what I did next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thank you. That's the percent of homes in that region. So there are basically 78% of our homes would sell for, or 70% of our single-family homes would sell for less than $1 million. Another 17 for 1 to 2. Interesting, if you take 78 and 17, you get 95%. So 95% of the homes in the community would probably sell this year for $2 million or less, and 5% will sell for more. I think that's a great lead into my next slide, actually. There you go. So under $2 million on average it has a fairness factor of 105. It pays a little bit more than it should. Over $2 million, all of them together, a fairness factor of about 64 cents, 64%, or 64 cents on the dollar. Do next. Oh yes, I looked at this over time because I was curious to see when we did the reassessment or the assessment in 96, what happened? So the short bar is over 2 million, the tall bar is under 2 million. And these are in 5-year time bands, so this is 98 to 2002, and you can see that the under 2 million, again, it's not that they sold then at $2 million, it's what they sold then, what they would be today, okay? So what you see is it's always been the same. And what that tells me is the process doesn't improve the outcome. You know, we started with something which was probably not as good as it should have been. I've heard a lot of anecdotal information. I wasn't here then, but I've heard a lot of stories about it. It doesn't look like it's gotten a lot better over 25 years. Conclusions. Our taxes aren't fair. They're highly regressive. If you live in a $1 house and you're paying 10 cents, and someone's living in a $10 house and they're only paying 38 cents on the dollar, it's not fair. It's not self-correcting. Whatever our process is, it's not self-correcting. In short, the system doesn't work for us. So my recommendation, townwide reassessment, one that's fair and transparent, so that everybody understands what's being done and what's being measured. I think if we had Jay Leno do Man on the Street and run around Phillipstown, I'll bet there aren't 5 people in this town that could tell you how the budget, the assessment, and the taxes actually work. And when I hear people that are afraid of the assessment, you're afraid of either saving some money or you're afraid of fairness. So this is my favorite slide, the with him slide. I used to work for a man and he always said, never give a presentation without telling people what's in it for me, with them. Rough estimate, really rough. But if we fix this, on average, taxes for these people would go down between 10 and 15%. The others would go up. So if you know what your house's full value assessment is, if you're under $2 million, odds are, not a guarantee, because there's a lot of variation in here, but odds are your taxes will go down somewhere between 10 and 15%. This also doesn't include the land. We have a lot of land around here, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's my with them. There's my thank you. And there's the slide I want to leave people with.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And now, Kathy,
Yes.
maybe you could just talk about, you've been into this issue for many years. You've been seeing, when you were in the business, seeing the houses for sale, what they
Yeah.
sell for, what their
Right.
market value is. Just maybe you could just talk about some of your experience.
Well, first of all, Phillipstown has 3 different school districts. There's the Garrison Schools District that pays $24 per 1,000 assessed value. Haldane, almost $40. Lakeland District pays $53.22. So there's a huge disparity there. I'm not sure how I hear there's talk about consolidating Garrison and Haldane, and I'm sure that's going to cause a big uproar. But, you know, I think that it would be a good idea. But as far as the people in my area, I'm in Continental Village. We're in the Westchester School District of Lakeland.
Right.
Our tax bill is based on the properties that sell for $12 million and $5 million and $6 million. Continental Village homes rarely go over $500,000 right now. I think there's 1 or 2 that are in $3 million. They're just in the wrong side of the line. I am concerned for those people because if we leave things the way they are, they're paying more than their fair share for the county and the state taxes because of the formula the state uses to evaluate their area. And in Phillipstown, what should the little Continental Village people be paying? We should have a special segment, I believe. Our current assessor, who's a part-time assessor, and a full-time assessor over at Orangeburg, doesn't have the time or the inclination. I've been going after him since 2011 to look at this. I mean, when I come up with sales, say a $3.6 million house that is assessed at $760,000. Of course, now we have to multiply that by like 3 because he's got the equalization rate at 35. You know, do it at 100, okay? This way everybody can figure out who's paying their fair share and it's not hidden the way we have to like calculate it. And his fairness factor, that person's only paying about 33% of what they should be. And I can go on and on. This is the reason that I've started a Facebook page about what goes on in Phillipstown as far as assessments. $3.8 million house assessed for $479,000. It's highway robbery. You know, they should be paying their fair share.
Are these houses currently on the market?
These houses are currently on the market. Thanks for bringing that up, Bill. So everybody can go and look up these houses and see who's paying their fair share. $12 million house on the market, they're being assessed at 1.3, which is a total of 3.4 million. She wants 12 million for her house. Anyway, you can see that it's totally skewed. Our part-time assessor doesn't have time to do this stuff correctly. It's been 20-something years. And I worry that if he does do a reval, because he's constantly threatening this to me, that the Continental Village people are going to get slammed with Lakeland, because if the houses are assessed for the true market values of 12 million instead of 3, then our formula is even higher, right? Is that true, would you say?
Well, it would be you would have a bigger share of the Lakeland district tax levy, I suppose, marginally.
I mean, right now, the assessor has given us a special discount of 7%, because the last time we came to him that our taxes were too high, he took everybody in Continental Village and gave them a 7% decrease and said, don't come to me with a grievance about your taxes. And it goes away with a new reval.
Excuse me. I think the only thing I could reasonably say, since I don't have the facts and figures, is that if we're talking about a segment of a particular district and the value of that segment increases more than the value of the other segments, yes, that will increase the school tax.
So
That's the
if
simplest
we
way I
get
can
a
say it.
reval and try to get fairness for taxes and who's paying their fair share and who's not, we'll be hurt.
Well, again, this is one of those things that's very hard to predict absent a reassessment being done. Because if the premise here is that there are a significant number of properties that are undervalued and they are now valued appropriately, yes, it's going to increase the value of that segment, but the taxes coming in are now going to be spread out among taxable value that wasn't previously
Well,
there.
I understand that, but it will affect our school taxes, and that there should be a way for them to figure out how they can balance that. And, we're in the lower, under the 500 market value, $500,000, and we shouldn't, the formula should not include houses that sell for 12 million, okay?
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to open it up for questions. We have a microphone over there. We're live streaming this, so we'd like to, if people would like to ask questions, identify yourself too, so people know who you are.
I'm Mike Armstrong, I'm a resident in Cold Spring. I have a question, I guess I'm puzzled a little bit. When you said that the sale of a property does not trigger a change in its valuation, and what puzzled me was that the only two things that seems to trigger a change in valuation was either if there was construction on the property, presumably that changed the square footage, or if there was a grievance.
Right.
So what puzzles me is when you do a reval, are you considering the sale prices of those properties? In other words, you bring that data in at that point.
Yes.
Then I guess what puzzles me is why don't you continuously bring in the sales data, continuously consider it, and why defer that consideration to a special event on the revaluation? Obviously, ideally, you would not have a reval, you would just do it ministerially, you would do this on a continuous basis. But what is going on there?
So the New York State courts have created this scheme or phrase, if you will, of welcome neighbor. So you're in a town that hasn't done anything for quite some time. So folks, let's say folks are all underassessed at a certain level, or a majority of them, a large number of them are underassessed at a certain level. Your house is worth, say, $500,000. But your neighbor comes along, buys basically the exact same house, but he buys it for $1 million. Now you're going to raise him to $1 million. That means he's going to pick up a much bigger portion of the tax bill than you are, even though your houses are basically the same. I'm sorry, my preliminary statement in that was a little off. Basically, if you don't want to take a situation where similarly valued houses are assessed at different levels of assessment, because first of all, the New York State law says you can't do that. Everything within an assessing jurisdiction has to be assessed at the same level of assessment, i.e. you're either at 50% of this market value, or you're at 100% of market value, 10% of market value. Everybody's supposed to be treated the same. If you were to create a new assessment where you're assessing any sales at 100%, you're creating a differential in that assessment level.
But in a municipality that keeps it at 100%, then they can use the sales price, right? Is
Yeah, see, that's what I,
that- If they keep it at 100%.
Who says that? Is that the state that permits?
That permits that.
municipality? In other words, if a municipality says that it will stay at 100% forever, then that municipality can use the sales price. So it's allowed to introduce that data into its computation of what the evaluations are.
yes, the key here is that the municipalities that are maintaining 100% are doing so by an annual reassessment. They're doing that systematic analysis I described earlier. If they are doing that, they are absolutely permitted to take into account the most recent sales that have occurred since the prior year's roll. The key here is that you have to be looking at the values for all properties in the municipality. As Vic said, what the legal system in New York State does not permit, another term for it would be selective reassessment, that you are only addressing values of certain property. And that's why the reassessment process is defined in law the way that it is. You must be doing a systematic analysis of all property. And if you do that, you can absolutely do what you're suggesting.
If you do it once, if you do a reassessment once and then you stop, you can't follow those sales values. You have to maintain.
Then how does the state expect the town to do a reval every year when it's so costly? Why doesn't the state
It's done
give a
differently.
rebate or something?
Well, for example, like in the town of Carmel, where I live, they did a reassessment in 2017, and they've kept it at 100% every year since. The assessor, they have 13,000 parcels in Carmel, almost 3 times as many here, and they pay a contracting firm about $25,000 a year to help the assessor to keep it at 100%. That's what he says that they spend. So that's what their investment is in fairness, to keep everything fair in the town.
And if you think about those numbers, you mentioned how costly it is. $25,000 a year amongst 13,000
That would be
parcels.
great, that would be
Nothing,
great,
right?
yeah. But I mean,
That's-
our assessor doesn't have office hours. You know, he's never in the office. He goes maybe in the morning so that he can get to his job, his full-time job. So if you're not there, how can you be doing the work?
Look, just to answer your question, since you seem to be wanting me to respond to that, the honest answer is that we, tax and finance, we do not have any authority whatsoever to tell a municipality to reassess. That is part of what I would describe as the weak legal structure of property tax in New York State. There is nothing that compels reassessment. You know, when I described the valuation date before, that each roll has an annual valuation date, that sets up the premise for why reassessment is necessary, but it is entirely up to each municipality to decide if that is an appropriate action. There is nothing outside of, I mean, historically, I've heard stories, I don't know how prevalent this really ever was, that, you know, maybe somebody brought some kind of a lawsuit to force a town to do a reassessment. I couldn't point to an actual, well, I could. There was an instance in Nassau County some years ago, but Nassau County is a world unto itself. Basically, unless elected officials believe that there is a need for reassessment, or unless property owners say to the board, look, we really think that a reassessment is warranted, that's where the decision is going to be made. I'd also point out that former Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff put in a tremendous amount of effort trying to get a change to the law that would require periodic reassessment, and sadly that never got any traction. So the short answer is that if someone is looking for something systemic, that would need to come through our state elected officials, because they are the policymakers.
Yeah.
David?
Sure. Back there, yeah, Nick.
Yeah, hi Dave, thanks for putting this together. One of the reasons that a town gives, or say in this case Phillipstown gives, I live in Garrison here in Phillipstown, for not doing a revaluation. I understand there's a cost to doing it, but you know, things cost money, we pay for them. What, is there a philosophical reason why? What did the town say when you approached them in your article? Why not do this? Why has it been a generation since it was last done?
All that they've been able to tell me is that it costs too much, that in a sense the town can't afford it. They can't afford to do what would, you know, make it a fair system, but that they, you know, they can't come up with the money for it. It's too expensive. So there's no other, and the other reason was that it could cause some, you know, some people might be upset in the town. If people who were underassessed got a big jump, that there, you know, there could be some pushback, you know, through the transition to to fairness, that could, you know, make some upset, so they don't want to upset people. So those were really the two reasons. And then the assessors also said, well, that's not really the problem in this town, the fact that the assessments are unfair. He's the assessor. That's not really the problem. The problem are these 3 school districts and the varying tax rates, and that's the issue that you should be, he told me that that's the issue you should be talking about. Well, that's a whole different discussion. That's about how the districts work together. This is about how the taxes are allocated within each of the districts. It's a different issue than the consolidation of the school districts. Maybe that's a good idea, I'm not sure, maybe. But the assessments are just about how the taxes that the school boards and the towns and everybody decides upon get divvied up among the people, among the property owners. Sure.
Would it be possible for Phillipstown to do just the overview assessment to make it cheaper rather than the door-to-door? I mean, I was just attending a town board meeting where the town board said it's just extremely expensive and the town right now is not in a very good financial situation. Would it hold up in court if we just did the overview version, and how much cheaper would that be than the door-to-door, which doesn't really seem very feasible around here anyway?
I like the 25,000.
Yeah, well, you know, based on the experience in Kent, the price that they got for theirs, somewhat similar. The town, a little more commercial in Phillipstown than in Kent, but if you take that, because it was, you know, less than $500,000. So I think the town's budget is 12 million or something a year, something like that. It's a cost. If you bond it over a number of years, you know, it's a, but as I was thinking about it, you know, they can't afford it. Okay, but the other 5 towns in Putnam County have been able to afford it. So, you know, every municipality has their own, certainly their own priorities, and it has been a priority in other municipalities here. Not so much in Westchester, not in some communities it has, in a majority it is not. In Putnam County, the majority, that's what the municipalities have decided, that's, you know, something we want in this county is fair assessments. Sure, in the back there.
Hey, my name is Jason Angel. I'm on the town and Phillips board.
Yeah.
We've talked
Yes.
about these three articles. So a couple questions. You know, obviously, and I've said this at town board meetings. I understand it's a complicated issue, but with, you know, when you end up on a list like the state's list of regressive municipalities, that's not a list you want to end up on. Looking at Bill's data there, that shows that there is a regressive nature, i.e. the higher value homes are paying less of their share. That is not a situation you want to be in if you believe in tax fairness, right? So how do we, and I get the concerns about affordability, like Heidi just mentioned, we're about to go into a tax cap override, right? So it's good to hear the idea that some municipalities decide to budget for a reevaluation and put money away towards it. I mean, I have a couple questions. I know the county probably has an interest in municipalities being at full valuation because that affects their tax rolls. Do counties ever assist municipalities in doing a revaluation because it is in their best interest to do so? So that's one question to just hear from. And then the second question is, how would you, Bill, you did a lot of work looking at all of those sales, right? And you came up with some very kind of stark and convincing data. If we look at that and we're saying that, you know, how do we take Bill's data and pass it, you know, look at it more closely? Because if Bill's data stands up and we're saying that 5% of properties in Phillipstown are really the ones throwing off and making the system aggressive, you can't just do a revaluation of 250 homes, right? So, you know, it seems too bad that you can't just kind of look at the regressive end of the spectrum. You do have to do a revaluation of the entire town, I'm guessing legally. So I guess those two questions would be, one, is the county ever step in to play any role in funding reevaluation at the local level? And two, how do you kind of dig into Bill's data and say, if there are 250 homes that are throwing off the whole curve, how do you respond to that? I guess there's no other way besides a full revaluation.
Yeah, relative to your first question about funding from the county, that's a question. There have been counties, other counties, where there has been some support. I don't honestly know to any degree that it was financial, but as I recall, certainly when Putnam County went through its county-wide project for '96, there was a great deal of hands-on support through the county's Real Property Tax Services Office. Again, I am in no position to speak for Putnam County and what might be available today or what the county government's position on that would be. There are other counties across the state where there is a more centralized approach to property tax support. So I think it's fair to say there might be, or there are other instances in other parts of the state where there are varying levels of support for local reassessment. Whether that includes money, some kind of aid, that I don't know. And I mean, you characterized it, I think, very well. Right now, I do not know of any way that if the premise here is that there is a segment of properties in the town that are the issue, I know of no way to address those outside of reassessment because legally there is no defensible way to approach that. If someone went in and simply reassessed those properties, chances are that you would foster a series of challenges from that segment of the community on the basis that they are being selectively reassessed.
Yeah. And just to follow up quickly, that does the county actually have a self-interest in a municipality doing a reevaluation, i.e., does the county get a greater share of taxes from Phillipstown once we're at market at 100%?
No. Again, the thing about reassessment, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a town, the school district, a village, a county, reassessment is about ensuring fairness. Now, look, is it possible? There have certainly been historical reassessments where, as a result of doing one in a community, the reassessment has captured a tremendous, tremendous amount of value that wasn't previously on the roll. So as an example, if I turn to Westchester, and I hope that I'm remembering the figures right, the town of Greenberg, which did its first reassessment in 2016, I believe as a result of doing that project, they added $6 billion in value to the roll that had previously not been captured. Now again, a lot of that, I can't tell you that every municipality that does a reassessment will have that experience. It's really going to be dependent on the circumstances of each individual municipality and how accurate or not the property inventory is. Is there a great deal of inventory that was not previously being assessed, picked up as a result of that project? Or for that matter, as has been the subject of some discussion here tonight, value that isn't being captured. And you know, realistically, in a reassessment in a community that hasn't done so in many years, it's likely to be a combination of the two. But to what degree, no one could predict.
Yeah, when the town of Carmel did their revaluation in 2017, they added $600 million worth of property. And it got a slightly bigger piece of the county tax levy, incrementally, nothing huge, but 600, you know, it just expanded the tax base of the county. And there was $600 million worth of real estate that was taxed, that hadn't been taxed before.
Dave, do you have an idea, hunch about how much money is falling off the table here in Phillipstown as a result of not, you know?
Well, there's no money for, but untaxed property, I don't, hundreds of millions. I don't know what it is. No, I couldn't say. Hundreds of, you know, at least 100 million, 2, 3, I don't know, you know, but substantial.
David, I'll stick my neck out. I think it's at least $500 million.
So if you think about that, if it's $500 million, it's not new money to be found in the tax rolls, but that's $500 million more to spread the tax, you know, the tax levy over, which means your tax rate is going to go down.
Right.
So if your assessment stays the same and you're paying a smaller tax rate, now your tax bill goes down.
To provide tax relief to people. Sure, in the back there.
I keep on hearing that the reassessment is based upon, going to be based upon market value. And that's good today because market is going up, prices of houses are going up. But what happens like in 2008 where there's a real estate crash?
Yep.
Does that mean my tax is going to go down? Because
Right.
I saw a condo go from $375,000 to $108,000.
Right.
Right?
No.
So, and the other thing is, right, the second question is, I question your data. Right? When you said that people below the $2 million will see their property taxes go down by 10%, I question that. Right? Because that's like putting out a carrot to this audience. Oh, because everybody came here looking for a reduction in their property taxes, and you're saying, oh, we're going to get 10% reduction. I'd be really cautious on making a statement like that. But
Yeah.
my question is, does the market, you know, when the real estate market crashes, does taxes go down?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'll answer it this way. Like you mentioned, in 2008, property values decreased because of various financial conditions. So here's the thing. I can't tell you what's going to happen to your taxes, and I'll explain why, but in a situation as you describe, if the town is reassessing, your assessments should go down. Now keep in mind that the assessment, every person's individual assessment, is the way your individual share of the property tax is distributed. The property tax to be collected is going to be determined by how much the town, the city, the county, the school district, the village need to run their operations. So if the amount of money they need to raise is not changing, or if it has to go up, chances are the taxes would not go down. But the assessment on which your taxes are distributed would go down because, again, I go back to something I said at the beginning. There is an annual valuation date which is supposed to be applied to each and every assessment roll. And if in the consideration of a particular roll values have diminished, then the assessments should come down proportionately. If the amount to be raised, the tax levy, is not changing, if that's staying the same, or in the worst case, if it's going up, that probably means that, well, if everyone's assessment's going down, the tax rate, how much is being collected, will go up. Because again, the two are independent of each other.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, two questions. One is just a clarification. Dave or Bill, in your analyses, did you notice any, just curious, any significant variation between residential properties and commercial residential properties? So that's question number one. The second one's kind of an out-of-the-box question. The argument could be made that property taxes are by their very nature regressive, and that someone with a $300,000 home shouldn't be paying the same percentage on their property taxes as someone with a $12 million home. So I'm just curious to know if there's any precedent for, or whether it would be legal or mechanism for actually making property taxes progressive, even if they were assessed at their fair value.
There's homestead. So the only answer to that that is a yes, if you will, is when you do a revaluation, you have the opportunity to have homestead and non-homestead classes. So if you're in a municipality that has a substantial amount of commercial property, you can actually try to make the property tax a little bit more progressive by putting more of the burden on the commercial sector as opposed to the residential sector. And you can create differential tax rates. John can speak to that more than I can.
Very briefly, as Vic rightly said, homestead, which is Article 19 of the real property tax law, is an option. To give this some context, there are close to, I think they're just under 1,000 towns and cities, and an additional about 550 villages in the state of New York. Among all those assessing units, there are no more than about 45 municipalities that have adopted homestead. The reason being, as Vic said, the premise of homestead is that you haven't done a reassessment in many, many years, and your non-residential value, which typically is commercial, again, there's an assumption that it's a significant part of the roll, is diminishing substantially. And if you don't adopt homestead, all of that tax is going to shift to the residential. So it is an option, but it's not an option that many folks or that many communities find practical. Outside of that, the only way to address what you're suggesting would be through the law, which would be through your state elected officials.
Well, and then there's also these various exemptions that are in New York State's law for various low-income elderly, for example.
That would be my question.
There's an exemption.
To this gentleman's question, can you guarantee everyone below the median house value of this area that their taxes are going to go up under this scheme?
No, they're not. The exemptions aren't linked to property values. They're linked to income, so that people with a certain income level or veterans get an exemption. We also have the STAR program, which is another way for people under a certain income level to get property tax relief, but not on the value of your home. Sure.
It seems that the assessment is largely based on real estate value. Now, one of the problems is you have say, an older person like me who's lived here for a long time on Social Security, etc. My property might increase into the stratosphere with inflation, and I could never afford that might help the person who's been around for a long time, whereas if it's strictly what you could sell the property for, it's going to really shatter a lot of the, people without the income, they'll have to move. And this is a big problem, I mean, it's an extremely big worry of mine. I want to leave my property to my son, but the value, it's on this map, and the values up there have increased a lot, but we don't want to sell. We don't plan to sell. And it seems like if it's only based on sales price, the lower middle class, the middle class is going to be pushed out. Whereas I think now it's pretty much square footage of house, amount of property, etc. And maybe that's the way to go, so that because values are sort of like art, they can shift all over the place. And to base it strictly on real estate value doesn't seem fair to a lot of people, I think, in my opinion.
So I got the privilege of serving about 20 years in the state legislature. And there has been a push for some time now, I'd say the last decade or so, a lot more discussion about trying to remove a lot of the tax burden off of the property tax and move it over to an income tax. Those discussions are happening. That said, when it comes to real property, the way it works right now is it is based on the market value of your home, or it's supposed to be. When you haven't done a reassessment in some time, it may have nothing to do with the market value of your home. But that said, what the legislature has tried to do in situations like that, in order to try to keep people in their home that may not be able to afford it because their assessments have gone up. And before I get to that, for 1 second, I don't want to confuse assessments and tax rates or tax levies. You got to understand, your house could be worth $1 million. If your tax levy is $1, you're not going to be paying much. If your tax levy is $100 million, you might be paying a bunch, depending on how much that $1 million is of the entire pie of people that have to share that $100 million worth of tax levy. So don't ever confuse the tax levy with your assessment. When your tax levies go up and up and up and up, no matter what portion of the assessment you have, you're going to end up seeing a higher tax bill over time. They're not the same thing. But back to what I was about to say, there are exemptions out there for specifically geared toward seniors that want to stay in their home. Unfortunately, the legislature, let me start with the fortunate. Fortunately, the legislature recently made the decision that they were going to increase the income limits for people to qualify for those exemptions. Seniors making up to $50,000 a year now in the state of New York can apply for a low-income senior exemption and get 50% off of their assessment. If you are making less than $58,000, they can have a sliding scale. You can get 5% off. There's an incremental way of doing this. That said, what the legislature hasn't really recognized is that $50,000 in Putnam County, in Westchester County, in Nassau and Suffolk isn't necessarily a lot of money. $50,000 in Wyoming County is a lot of money.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm under 50,000.
But here's an addition. In Phillipstown, however, Phillipstown has the limit of only $29,000. The limit has now been raised to $50,000. 3 out of the 6 towns in Putnam County have raised the limit to $50,000. Phillipstown has not. And the assessor, he's advising the town against raising the limit because he doesn't like the way the law exempts any distributions you might get from a 401k. And he, in fact, has said that people who don't like it could go to Florida.
Yeah.
But this is maybe, I don't know if the town board has discussed this, Jason, but you guys are at 29,000. And 3 out of the 6 towns in Putnam County are at 50,000.
And it goes by school district also.
Yeah, and the
I
school
bel-
districts too, right.
And I believe that our assessor has recommended to Haldane, because they're doing this big project, that don't offer this to seniors, because if they can't afford it, then they should move to Florida.
I did not know that's a town level decision to set that income exemption, or STAR, that's a town level decision.
For
By
the
school
town
district.
tax,
Town.
yes, for the town
By-
tax.
by-
For the town tax. The county has done it, and actually in Putnam, they've phased it in over 3 years. For Putnam County taxes in the 3 municipalities, Carmel being one of them. So they started 40 to 45 to 50, and that's for the 50% reduction. Phillipstown is still at 29. So it's,
That would be a huge difference. Also, the younger people who don't have that much of an income, right now you come home with like half your paycheck, but even if you're below the median income, that's the way it was when I worked for IBM. I came home with about half my income, and I was below the median. But then there was the property tax above that. And nowadays, young people, how can they take, say, like 3/4 of their income out for taxes and live on the rest? They've got a real problem, and I don't think this is good. The middle class is gradually disappearing.
Right.
And in fact, Victor Davis Hanson, the dying citizen, has some stuff to say on this. But anyway, thank you.
sure.
I'm a clinician, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer, but I keep hearing, well, it's too expensive. I've been here for 11 years in Continental Village. And it feels like there's a little bit of gaslighting, to use our term, going on. Like, what do we do? If they're saying, oh, it's too expensive, I feel like my mother just told me to take back the pair of shoes I bought because my allowance isn't high enough or something. It's very sort of disenfranchising and infantilizing. How can we start to challenge this? It's been almost 30 years. And what this lady is going through is so rampant in my area, in Kathleen's area, where people can't afford to stay where their grandchildren are. So this is really serious, and I'm also wondering if Sandy is big on this. Is Dana Levenberg like following up on it? Does anybody know? Like, where do we start to put our votes, our ballots, our letters, or whatever? Where do we go? How do we get boots on the ground?
I don't know that anybody here would be able to speak for the Assemblywoman or your local senator or anybody of the sort, but I think it's well worth giving them a call and asking them that.
Where they are?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because both of the representatives for Phillipstown, Dana Levenberg in the Assembly and Bob Rollison in the State Senate. Bob was the mayor of Poughkeepsie. They were at 100%. Dana was the supervisor in Ossining. She was there when they did the revaluation in Ossining. So they're both, proponents of, fair assessments. Where they come down on any legislation or any leadership in that, I'm not sure.
But unless I misheard, it's actually the town level in Phillipstown that this is being blocked, unless I wasn't.
Well, it's the town's decision, yes.
Exactly.
The state it's the town's decision.
The supervisors, the town board, I mean, who do we
Yeah.
start to talk to?
Well, Jason is one that came. Everybody was invited, right? The whole board was invited to come to this meeting.
But, yeah.
And they all
just.
decided.
So you direct ire or someone my way. No, but attention, I mean, like, so Neil is running for town board, right? So, we're about, the town board's about to enter six public hearings around budget. Over, starting in mid-October, all the way until the budget's ratified in the first 2 weeks of November. And so if this is a budget decision about where budget dollars are spent, then residents have the right to come in and say, we want a line item in the budget for revaluation. This matters to us. So
Right.
it's a local decision, so that is a place to start if it's something that people care about. Yeah.
But it's a fair question. It's like, I know you mentioned the state assembly and the supervisor says, we don't have enough money, and we're not gonna do any reassessment, then everything's for naught, right?
But it's 5 people on a town board, you know, it's a, you know, so I don't know if he controls all 5 votes.
By the way, one clarification on that. Assessors serve a term. County directors of real property also, we serve a term. So we're responsible to the elected officials to some degree, but we're quite independent once we're in that position. So the reality is, when it comes to how assessments are placed on an assessment roll, your assessor has great power. The supervisor or mayor or whomever can speak up, the town board members can say something because they have the power to reappoint or not reappoint that person. But the reality is, when you're there, the ultimate decision is yours. Is that correct?
In terms
Of setting assessments and putting numbers on?
Well, yes, the assessor is responsible for setting assessments. No one is supposed to tell the assessor how to set assessments. Now, to be fair, when it comes to doing a reassessment, I'll go back to something I said earlier. The vast, vast majority of individual assessors do not have the wherewithal or the resources to conduct a reassessment of their own volition, even if they believe it's necessary. That's where a municipal board comes into play, because the municipal board would really have the role of providing the resources and authorizing the project, and of course supporting it.
So you're saying we should go to the board and be a pain in the ass, right? And
Well-
do we get what we want?
Well,
Yeah.
The only thing
It's bottom line.
The only thing I'll say is at the last town board meeting last Thursday, obviously this issue was brought up, and I made my feelings personally, speaking only for myself about it, clear. But Supervisor Van Tassel did assign me, starting to look into what the current cost, I got some of those numbers today, would be for revaluation by some consulting company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
But I need to find a way where a reval is not going to kill us in Continental Village, not within the Lakeland District.
Yeah.
Because it's so big, what we pay compared to Garrison.
Yeah. Okay. One more question there?
I have a question. Is it realistic to think that a part-time assessor, such as Phillipstown has, could maintain 100%, hit the target of 100%, which would eliminate the need to have these periodic disruptive revaluations? Or do you need to have a full-time assessor to even think about keeping to that standard of 100% valuations?
yeah, that's a question that I think has to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. Most assessors who are doing the kind of program you're describing are full-time, but there most definitely are assessors who are also doing that on a part-time basis. Those tend to be in more rural communities. We have some assessors, say, in Delaware, some other counties. Admittedly, those towns are smaller than the parcel counts we're talking about here, but there are some who do it. It's really going to depend on the circumstances and how much time a part-time assessor could devote to a project like this. Right now, I'm working with a community up in Delaware County, which is looking at doing a reassessment, and it's similar to the situation that you framed. The assessor is part-time. I think that individual is contracted for 20 hours a week. And it's a very legitimate question. Look, given all the work that needs to be done in reestablishing assessments, reviewing the work that a contractor may or may not be doing if they decide to get a contractor, how much can that individual do in 20 hours a week? Is there a need to bring on additional staff to work with the assessor? And I mean, this is an individual who works in more than one municipality. So based on that individual's preferences, that individual might say, look, I really can't give you more time because I'm working X amount of time elsewhere. There are a lot of factors that go into it. I would just leave it that it really has to be examined, as I said initially, case by case.
I was told by our supervisor today that he is looking to hire a full-time, or he will be looking to hire a full-time assessor, and that a reval would be done, but it's going to take some time. So to me, you know, I don't know if that means anything, but that's what he told me today.
Okay, any more questions, or are we, one more question,
I
yeah.
have a real life question. I'm just a little confused about I've lived in Cold Spring for the village of Cold Spring for 31 years. And I've lived in my current house for 12 years. And I paid X. And, you know, if my understanding is that when, you know, I haven't sold my house, I haven't added on to it. And I noticed on my tax bill this time that the market value assessment has gone up by, say, $125,000.
Right.
So I'm confused about that. You know, you might say, well, you know, appeal that, but, you know, the house next door to me sold for a lot more during that little bubble of COVID.
Yeah.
And I always say if I could afford a $1 million house, I would have bought a $1 million house, right? And, you know, I do feel, a lot of people in this room said, you know, it's going to affect people who, you know, maybe not even see it, but everybody has a certain budget. And that's how it should be. And another point I wanted to make is that, you know, Phillipstown is a big town, but the hamlet and the village and Continental Village, we each have our different situations, and not just different tax rates, but, you know, for example, the village of Cold Spring has very unique housing. There's historic housing, and there's, you know, little capes like mine, and there's, you know, so if you just do it on square footage or how many bedrooms, or, you know, fly a drone over my house and somebody has a lower level that they added on a limestone or something, I don't know. You know, it's hard to find fairness.
Well, it's not so hard to assess a house in Continental Village that have all the same size lots.
Yeah.
They're 3 bedrooms, 2 bed, you know, or three bedrooms, 2 baths, and so much square footage. It's pretty easy to do the low end. That's why we're paying more than our fair share, because it's easy to assess us. But when these $1 million houses,
Like, how did my assessment go up? I'm just curious.
Well, that would have been because the equalization rate changed this year by about, it went from, I don't know, 36 to 33. So there was a 10% change. So that everybody's went up.
But
Yeah.
Here's something that I need to add to that. There have been a number of observations made about the equalization rate earlier in this program. Here's the thing that everyone needs to keep in mind. The equalization rate is an overall average. Okay, so if, the 2023 equalization rate in the town is 35.22. What that means is that on average, and I stress on average, your assessment represents 35.22% of your full market value. Now, because that is an overall average, and let me take a little sidebar here, even though legally we are all entitled to use the equalization rate as an indicator of market value for purposes of deciding, is our assessment fair? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the value is necessarily accurate. Again, the equalization rate is an overall average. Your market value, the barometer that you can use, as I think you have, you're looking at the implied market value. It's gone up 125,000. Okay. Now, do you think the implied market value is reasonable for your property? Do you think it's low? Do you think it's high? If you think it's high, then clearly you would want to speak with your assessor about, hey, look, here are some reasons why I think my property value is overstated. And if the assessor doesn't agree with you, you're entitled to file a grievance. On the other hand, if you think your property's value is actually more, well, chances are you're not going to say anything. But again,
You know, but, right, I was just wondering what I missed, so I missed the reevaluation.
See,
But if it were put up to market value based on what something next door paid, or what, then I'm going to be in trouble.
you know, again, at the end of the day, the equalization rate is really used for one overriding purpose. It's to ensure that the term that's commonly used is rough justice among municipalities that have shared segments. So that would be at the county level, because in Putnam there are 6 towns, or among most school districts that have pieces of more than one town. And it's intended to ensure that the assessed values that are not at 100% are appropriately all brought to full value, so then the county or the school district can say, now we know how much of our tax levy to assign each town or each town segment. That's really the overriding portion of the equalization rate. Again, legally, the law allows people to use the equalization rate to use that implied market value as a barometer for a decision as to whether you should challenge. But I'm not going to tell you that's necessarily an accurate number, because again, at the end of the day, and I can't stress this enough, the equalization rate is an overall average. It is not a precise number that is meant to predict actual market value for each individual property.
Great. Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for coming. I want to hope it was an informative evening, and check out my column, lohud.com. You let me know.